Ladies and gentlemen, guys and girls, welcome to the official start of the Age of Warfare podcast. I am Sertolian Anxious Maximus, and that is the gate, Aidan, Colyer, still not Rasputin. We had a fun show 2 weeks ago about that. And today, on our very first episode of the Age of Warfare podcast, we're going to go something a little not too simple. It's going to be pretty fun. We're going to be talking about Roman society and social classes in ancient Rome. So, before we get started, how are you doing, Mr. Colyer?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. We've got nice weather over here at the moment. Job's easier. I work in a shop at the moment, so at a university, which means they're all on holiday, so it's very, very quiet. So we can bimble around and earn our money having fun at work, which is a rare thing to do at work. And yeah, so I've just been really good mood, doing a bit of writing here and there. Yeah.
That is Paul. I see. That is Paul. Oh. Thank you for watching. For me, I'm doing well myself. Working hard on my next book, editing it, and all that. But anyway, let's get to the topic at hand. Obviously, ancient Rome. It's pretty similar to today's society where you have different social classes. Although in ancient Rome, there's some differences between social classes then to social classes now. And one of those differences, Aidan, is that now social classes is determined by how much money you have, and not necessarily how much power you have. Now, back in ancient Rome, it was about how much influence you had, or if you were related to anybody in the, in politics, like the senators and all that.
So this is one of the big things I think we should start off with is how social class. So obviously, say in the US, especially, it's how much money you have is what you're seeing as your social class. And while there are other bits of things that go along with it, and class doesn't instantly come with having money. There is this, you're put into the class by how much money you have. Over here, it is like that, but we still have a hangover from this more Roman style system of you have the poor, the peasants, the working class types. You then have your middle class, so over here it would be people who work in shops, who collect your bins, who do the cleaning jobs and stuff like that. People like me and my wife, we're in those types of jobs. We're working the service industry, would be what you term it as. Your middle class would be your managers of shops, your small business owners, your people who and they might be doing freelance. So Angel, you would be in that middle class for us from that social standing. My old job as an archaeologist, it was because it's considered a professional, someone you went to university, you had a degree, you did that job. That's your middle class. Our middle class then gets weirdly stratified into lower middle, middle, and upper middle. Upper middle class then comes with a whole thing and owning certain amounts of land. Our upper class, and it's at the upper end of our spectrum where it really shows that our upper class is it's the hereditary money. And obviously, that's a thing in the US as well. You've got hereditary money at the top end, the super rich often. But over here, they're not necessarily rich. There's a certain style address that you can identify the people. And often you'll find that you get this sort of upper middle class where you've got the money, they're going out buying their nice cars and living in these like fancy houses and things like that, using all of the modern appliances. Where when you get into the proper upper class over here, you're talking, they'll be driving a Land Rover that they got from army surplus 50 years ago and their granddad fixed up and then taught each generation of the family to fix up. They will potentially still have their manor house, but their manor house will be cordoned off for certain wings and things like that because the expense of maintaining it is so big. A good example of this is actually one of our animal sanctuaries. It's I've got his name now. It's one of the lords, and he's And he goes and he mucks out the stables and everything, and it's the only way that he could keep his land going and keep the upkeep of his house was he converted it this animal sanctuary as well. And it's Whipsnade is the place, and it's absolutely fascinating. So you've got this change in modern society of how they do things and how they interact, but essentially he's still the same thing. You've still got that stereotypical upper class British accent, which only really came out in the 30s and 40s as well, weirdly enough. But they're connected. Their friend might be the local MP, and their other friend may be a judge, but that's just because they're the people they know. It isn't because they had money, so they've became friends with these people, as you might get in other societies. It's just a factor of who they are as well. And often their clothing will be hand-me-down clothing that's stitched up and everything like that. You get this weird flip around at the top end of our society. So you've still got elements of that in our society. You go further afield, say India. I've been reading a few things about Indian social structures. And
the
caste system. There are people in India who say that that's complete and utter fiction. There isn't a thing that affects their society. But to me, the more and more I read about it, it's not the thing in their society anymore. They're more like we are in the UK, where we have this underlying sort of your peasant, your middle class, your upper class. They've got that kind of society that influences so many things. Like you read a few things, you're like, this person's clearly from that level of society because they think it's with the X. But I find it with my wife finds it more where she works as well, where she because it's it's called an apart hotel. So it's old school style hotel thing where you can live there for a long period of time if you wish, but you can just use it as a hotel. And a lot of businesses will use it on contract, and you get these people from bigger companies staying there as well. But because they've come from the central part of their company from a different country, and they've come over here for a job of several months, the way that they interact with people and how they interact with society is quite different as well. And you'll notice it with some of the Indian residents as well. Of if they're from the upper class of society, they will often treat the cleaners more like servants, which is, it could come across incredibly rude. But the vast majority of the time is they're not doing it rudely. That's how they've been brought up. That's how, from in their part of society, that's how you viewed people, is that way, which is a nice little entry of like how we have this stuff in the modern world of how Roman society was. Because I think personally that Roman society is a lot more like UK society, where money does give more influence, but you've still got this underlying, you're poor, you're middle class, you're upper class, and there are these weird glass ceilings between each of the classes, and it's
based on influence, right?
Interact.
Based on influence, correct?
Exactly, and it's who you know as to how it can make your life easier. For doing things.
And it's funny you mentioned that, Aidan, because I was kind of making the same comparison to the Romans and the Brits, and to no degree the Indian caste system, which is something we got to get into at a future episode, the Indian caste system, because that has its own pitfalls and crazy things. But
I think a lot of their stuff in India as well, because they were an ex-colony as well.
Correct.
They took a lot of the social side of things and the way that we ran stuff. They picked it up, and obviously they became independent. We won't talk about any of that or how any of that happened. But along with that, they had a lot of things that we had, and they kept going with the things that they thought, these things work, so we're going to keep them. We're going to carry on with them. Ignoring the whole colonial aspect of it, they did keep up and carry on. You think cricket, trains.
I wanted to quickly share my screen with the Indian caste system. I wanted to share the screen. Right here. Yeah, I want to share this. Yeah, the Indian caste system. Look, You got the priests and teachers to the top, warriors and rulers in the middle, then the farmers, traders in the in the third, and then neighbors, and then all the way in the bottom, the street sweepers and the cleaners. The idea of the caste system. And in India they call it Bharat. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it because I don't speak Hindi. Brahma, yes, that's Hindi. So that's to give you an idea of what we're talking about there. So let me get that out. And so the first thing I wanted to talk about, Aidan, was the free man, because the Romans had the free man. Basically, they were slaves who were free. These were free slaves that were allowed to function in Roman society, but they didn't have any rights to take office or vote or do anything. They basically just had basic freedom, and that's really about it.
It's that as a class of people we do see it in the modern world, but it's a little bit more subtle in the modern world. The US actually has a lot of these Roman elements into their society. So you think of it, if someone's been to a federal prison in the US, they come out, they are restricted on whether they can vote or not. Let's not get into the whole thing surrounding that, but there are restrictions on voting for certain parts of it. There are restrictions on holding office. They in the US, obviously, generally you can have a gun unless there's something that says not. They're one of the groups of people where it says no, you can't. So there are, and that also then comes under this societal thing of these people obviously equating slaves with people in prison. That's a whole different podcast that we're not going to delve into, but it does have that extra bit on it. Oh, Anthony, hey, that does have extra bit. You still have this weird class of people in the US who are the ex-felons. They are the freedmen population. It's the only place in the world where I see that there's a similar thing in modern society, where that's comparable. I mean, it's really surface level comparison. You think about it when you come out of federal prison, short of you're not allowed to hold certain offices and you're not allowed to buy a gun. It's not really, I mean, unless you're obviously out on bail type of thing, and then obviously you can't leave the state, blah, blah. But that's just a normal thing. Is those restrictions. It's the only group of people like that. The only other group of people that I could think of that were in that class are in the UK. If you own a business and that business goes bankrupt, you are banned from being a judge. You're not allowed to hold certain political positions, and you're not allowed to own a company. There's a time limit on the restrictions, but becoming a judge or there's certain other positions, it's permanent, effectively. If you are bankrupt, you're not allowed, because it's a case of, well, if you can't keep running a business and you run it into the ground that much that you're going to damage those people's lives, then yeah, cool. You're not going to be a judge. You don't have good judgment. Yeah.
But there was an interesting thing about the Roman freedmen, right? While the freedmen themselves were not allowed to hold office, right? Later on, the law gave any children born to freemen after formal integration into society full rights of citizenship, including the right to hold office. So if your kid if you're a freeman, you had a kid, that kid could hold office, not you, but your kid could.
Exactly. And you could earn a decent living and get them into office as well.
And it brings me to another tangent, Colyer, a small little tangent. I'm trying to think about any freedmen, any kids who were born to freemen who actually held a Roman office. I'm trying to think of if there was any. That's a good question. I can't think
off the top of my head, but there were definitely some tribunes that were, and obviously the senatorial class is. There's a few generations in between to have freedmen into the senatorial class. Obviously, we'll talk about that a bit later, but senatorial class was slightly different. But the tribunes of the plebs, I think there are a few that were the children of.
Yeah. I know plebs. I know plebs in the Empire era could hold office. I know, but in the early Republic era they couldn't. In the early Republic era, they were not allowed to hold office. It was patricians. So basically, it was either you were born into a partition family or you were kind of squilled, which is unlike today's. Although in the UK you got the royal family, and but you could still be prime minister. I'm not sure how that works in the UK.
So in the way that works over here is a royal. So you're not allowed to be in the House of Commons if you're a lord. The lords aren't allowed. Yes, go through a history of our prime ministers and have a look at them. There have been several. Seems very weird, but there's very certain specific stipulations upon that. There is actually a lordship that we have that is there's no land that comes with it. There's only a title, and the title is temporary. And if you wish to resign from the House of Commons under certain circumstances, what they do is they grant you this lordship, which means you're ineligible to hold that an office in Parliament anymore at that level. Therefore, I'm sorry, mate, but you're a lord now. You've got to go away.
You're a lord, right?
Oh no, I have to go away. It's getting promoted sideways. Essentially, they make them a lord. That lordship it's title only. It's a loophole that allows them to, if someone needs to be removed, but it's not they need to remove someone, so they grant the position. It's more if someone needs to leave, but you can't. There's certain things you can't give up as soon as you become an MP. You're an MP because it's a position of authority. You've been asked to do this. You've accepted that. It's like being in the army. You can't just quit your job. You have to serve out that contract. It's those positions within our government you can't hold if you have this lordship. So they give them this lordship to stop them doing that if they need to leave early. It's been used for various things, like say someone's got a terminal illness and they just want to spend their last year or so with their family. You go, well, we're going to give you this peerage because of the good work you've done. I'm sorry, you can't be an MP anymore. But it's backroom dealing, essentially, of we're going to do this to prevent you from your position because it's the only way you can get out of this position for that. So they keep it open specifically for that. It's one of the weird quirks of our system. But it's why we've got the House of Lords. So if you're a Lord, you're in the House of Lords. If you're not a Lord, then you can be in the House of Commons. A royal can never be in the House of Commons. You have to renounce all of your titles as well at certain points. You go back to the reason that Queen Elizabeth II was Queen. That came about with the King Edward I can't remember which one it was, later number 8, 9, something around there. He 7th possibly. He to marry the American divorcee, he had to give up being king, but he had to become king to then give up king, to then do that. You had to renounce any of those. You had it with Harry, is the most recent one, who's given up royal title to be able to pursue doing that. But if you have royal title, that's a job. You are born into that family. You are born into a job, and it's one of the things. There's a lot of things with if you look at the 1700s France, the stratification of their society, you've got the difference between the nobles as well. So you've got nobles of the blood, and then nobles who were nobles because of money. There was a lot of friction between them. This is what ended up in the French Revolution as well. A lot of this. But it was that you were expected, it's a very feudal idea, that you're expected, if you're that level of society, you have to do those things. If you want to keep your title, you do those things. If you do not do those things, you do not deserve your title. Therefore, you either have to give it up or it will be stripped from you and you will be disgraced, which is why people give it up. So Harry did not want to carry on doing the royal duties anymore. He gave that up. If he'd have decided not to do his royal duties, they'd have had to strip the titles from him, which would have thrown our entire political system into disarray. Yeah, he's technically in line for the throne, but there's no way in hell he'd ever get near it. Life expectancy is too many people in between. But it's still a hit on the family, and you become persona non grata of that because of what you've done. Look at Prince Andrew, or Andrew as we now call him, because he's Yeah, the only reason we use Prince Andrew is to signify who we're talking about. He's been removed from everything because of what he did. He didn't do anything illegal, but what he did brought shame upon the family,
Right,
because
yes.
you shouldn't have done anything that
Exactly.
even looked illegal. Therefore, you get removed. So there's this obligation. It's the obligation of your position when you're born into that, and that in our society stratifies down. Whereas in the US, you don't have that at all. There's nothing in your society. You might get it from your family that, oh, we've always gone to Harvard, you can't go to anywhere else. That'll be the level in the US.
By the way, we got a good question. This is Benny Barfield. Thank you for watching, Benny. He asks, what about the House of Lords?
They keep trying to fire themselves. It's like, I'm not even joking here. They have, every time I ever watch something about it, they have a thing on the docket. We have too many of them. They know there are too many of them. Once you're eligible for the House of Lords, you're eligible until you die. Now, with a burgeoning elderly population, these people aren't dying. We're just adding more. And then politically, you can reward people with titles to get into the House of Lords, which is traditionally done when you leave office as Prime Minister. You're allowed to nominate a certain amount of people to the honours list. That is then the monarch goes through and goes, yes, these people get that. The weird thing about our monarch, the monarch cannot say no. If the monarch says no, we cease to become a monarchy. So the monarch cannot say no. It's either we cease to become a monarchy or we have a civil war. That's kind of how we had our first one. I say first one. One of our civil wars.
And yeah, then he also says perception is everything, and he is correct. It's all about perception. A lot of things are about perception. So you are 100% correct there, Benny. Perception is, but perception might actually be more important than actual statistics.
Exactly. So it's this is why I use phrases like Lord in name or Prince in name for Andrew, for example. It's in name, but no one views him as. And it's one of the things with laws that go back to laws. We have it's up somewhere now at 800 and something, and they keep trying to put an age limit in. You've had this in the US with your in Congress as well, where they're trying to introduce age limits to even in it's especially in your court system as well with judges as well, because the only way you stop being a judge is you say I don't want to be a judge or you die. It's like you to take it to take the position of judge away from someone, they would have to do something absolutely horrendous. Horrendous, not horrendous to the common man. I mean, they could shoot someone on the street. They still would be allowed to be a judge because they would find a way around it. It's like it'd have to be something so insane, and probably it'd have to have a political element to it, so the side who had the power could get rid of them, which can cause problems in societies. The US is having big problems you're having big problems in your society at the moment because of those things as well. And it's a big thing to the Romans. The Romans had all of these big things in their society of how long people could do X. We will be talking about this obviously, but with the House of Lords, there is no age limit on it, and they keep going, no, there needs to be an age limit. So I'm eligible to be here and sign the laws of the country. I'm like 90. Like, can you fire me? Can we just, because they can't fire themselves, so they have to have a resolution to get rid of themselves. It's like, please, I just don't want to be here anymore. No, it doesn't pass. But the way I was,
Benny, and here's what Benny says, and this is true. So American judges are elected, so only the Supreme Court is my time. Yes, that is correct.
Yes. However, it's not just the Supreme Court, it is the circuit courts are appointed as well from that, and there are certain other what are the equivalent? So yeah, Supreme Courts, but there is more than just the Supreme Court in the US. Also, we've got a Supreme Court now as well. We've had it for
we got Danielle from Argentina watching from us as well. So
hello.
Thank you for watching. And the federal judges are appointees.
Yeah, that's the group. So essentially, yeah, that's a differentiation. Is if you're federal, you're appointed, essentially, is because it's the government saying something, the federal government saying something, therefore you have to. We could go into a long thing about that. I actually know more about that. I have the right to as a British person, and that's a massive tangent.
Now the plebeians are a very interesting class, Aidan, because when I was writing the Great Centurion, my first Roman series, which did really well, by the way. I was researching the plebeians, and I read something where there were 6 different classes of plebeians. There were 6 different classes. So in other words, you got your poor plebs, you got the middle of the line plebs, and then you got the respected plebs that have the wealth, but they don't necessarily have the influence. They don't know any partitions, but they have wealth. So let's say you're a really rich potter. You make pots for a living, and you make a really good living. While you may be rich, you could afford things that a normal pleb can't buy, but you still can't run for office because you don't have the influence. You don't have the social influence.
Exactly. So to use us as examples again, I'd be in the labourer pleb in the middle of your average pleb, one of those middle 3, depending on my financial income. So with my financial income, I put myself sort of those 3 labourer classes, somewhere in the middle one to the upper one of those. And then that highest fifth would be people like you, where it's you are earning, it's the entrepreneur, the single person business type of people. Right. So you'd be in that, but because you're not from a patrician family, so you'd have to marry into a patrician family, and then your children could, the same situation the freedmen had, it's their children could carry it on, which is where their focus on their family was so big.
Yeah, that's why. That's another good point, Aidan. That's why Roman families tend to be big, because they needed to be big so they could continue the chain forever and ever, which is contrary to now, where people want to have smaller families, where people are not into having big families anymore. So that's where America, or the modern world, kind of separates from the ancient world.
It's quite interesting as well that we've still got in modern society, because the old given was, if you're in an agricultural society, you have lots of children, your healthcare is worse, and you need more people to work on your farm. What's the easiest way to get yourself a new employee and to make sure that you have children? Have lots of them, which is why, say, when you look at something like religion, a lot of the core religions that people look at, a lot of their tenets are based back in those agricultural societies of where you get the high death rates and things like that. So a lot of the things of having big families often get caught up with people that are quite religious as well. With somewhere like the US, it then looks a little bit weird because there's no reasoning. It then becomes just a religious thing that they end up having lots of children. Where we have in the UK as well, that people have, and it's one of the things that you'll find the people on the right wing and the anti-immigration people complain about is that when you get people from, say, Islamic societies, and we're not talking the doctors who come from the Middle East, or say Pakistan's a big source of immigration for us. You're not talking about those people, but the families of those people that come over and do the general jobs and things like that. They often have bigger families. The right wing get worried about this, and we're not going to go into right wing thought here, but what is factually obvious is they will often have more children. They tend to be more religious. Poorer people often tend to be more religious. The US is one of those weird aberrations of modern countries where it's not just the poor that are more religious. It's all across your society. It's America being weird yet again, and just it's always the exception to the rule when it comes to these rules. In those things, you end up with poorer people tend to have more children as well, whereas in higher society you have less children. That was first predicated on healthcare. Generally, the richer you are, the easier it is to afford healthcare. So back then it'd be the acceptance. Your child is going to likely die, so you better have more of them, so at least you've got some left. Whereas if you were higher up in society, you didn't need to have as many children because you'd have left. And then, as you were saying about with those highest bits of society, is you don't want to have too many children when you're looking at people inheriting your throne. Otherwise, you end up like Turkey, and well, the Ottomans more than Turkey itself. With the Ottomans was if they had an elderly sultan, like in the medieval period, if they had an elderly sultan, people used to hold off fighting with the Ottomans and try and keep them okay until they had their.
That is A.L. White, otherwise known as Tony White. Thank you for watching. A.L. White is a talented science fiction and zombie horror author. Thank you for joining us. We're talking about your ancestors. Because by the way, A.L. White is Italian, so his ancestors were Roman. Yeah. So thank you for joining us. Yeah. I'm sorry to cut you off, Aidan. Just wanted to.
Yeah, that's fine. But yeah, the whole point of what I was saying was that the older societies, obviously, it's healthcare based. Is why you have a lot of children. But when you get into the upper levels of society, you want the more children. But like a monarch will want, say, it's the heir and the spare. So you have one boy who's your heir, you have a next boy who's the spare if anything happens to that first one. And then if you have more children, you want to pump out more children because you want a load of daughters so you can marry them off for alliances. That's what you're looking at. That's the ideal situation. Whereas in modern times, it doesn't really work like that anymore. Right. But so the way that we think of large families is very different, and now is very money focused. Either you're very poor and it makes zero difference to your zero income. How many children, or if you're rich, you can have as many as you like, but you can afford them.
Yeah, he's Sicilian and Irish. Still the Sicilians are still the Romans are still your descendants. Sicilian, although Sicily was Greek at one point before the Romans took over. So yeah,
they were also the big enemies of the Romans back in the Syracuse, weren't they? We're looking at descendant of Hannibal here.
Yeah, the city of Syracuse, in Sicily. So now I want to kind of move on, because obviously plebeians back in the day couldn't run for office, but in the Empire era and the late Republic era, they were able to run for office. They could, but the catch was they could only be one. I think there was only a minimum of 1 or 2 plebeians in the Senate.
There was one of the big things that they had. It was late Republic era. You had the 2 consuls, and there was major political strife over. They wanted one of the consuls to be a plebeian and one of them to be patrician, which obviously included the senatorial class. There used to be the senatorial class, which ended up being a class in and of itself. You're talking what we would view as, say, the 1% in the modern world. And when the plebeians actually got that through, it was late Punic Wars. It was Second Punic War. A lot of this came about, and the only reason they got it all agreed was obviously enough about the Punic Wars, Angel. There's kind of a lot of Romans dying at that point, and they needed whoever they could bloody get on the front lines and no strife at home to defeat everyone coming towards them. They had the social wars. They literally had the social wars. There was. I can't remember how many of them there were now. They had lots of them as well. It was partly with the formation of Rome as an empire as such. So with the Etruscans giving the Latins extra place. It was the whole big thing with the senator was they had a Latin senator.
Yeah, Benny asked, would that be similar to the Spartans with the 2 kings during the days of when Sparta was a city-state?
Oh, that's a comparison I have never ever thought of. But actually thinking about it, yes, you have 2 people at the top. It's the whole.
Aidan, hold that thought. We're talking about Roman society and society classes and how it meshes with modern society. Basically, we're comparing Roman society to modern society. With the different social classes. So that's what we're really talking about. So I know you're a little late to the stream, but but once the video is over, you can play it back from the beginning. You can watch the replay. All right, so there we go. So I'm sorry, Aidan. Please go on.
So when did I get to? So obviously you get that comparison with Sparta is spot on. You have two kings at the top, so you don't have one. Also, if you're in a militaristic society, the Romans were an increasingly militaristic society. You'd need two people at the top because, well, they did it with the consuls. You had what a consular army is a specific type of army that they had, and they had two of them. So one consul will go off one place, the other to another place. The idea being that you have one of the consuls going off to somewhere where not likely their army was going to be destroyed and killed and everything. So the second front that was easier, and then you had the other one go off to the really dangerous front, because if you lost them, at least you still had one. But from a political standpoint, that also meant that you didn't just have that one person in charge deciding this or that. It's the checks and balances argument. To take America as an example, obviously America took a lot from the Roman system of politics to create, Capitol building that looks like it was a straight up Roman building. The entire structure of your politics is because of that. But it was a Greek philosophical idea that you have the three types of government. You have your democracy, you have your oligarchy, and then you have your autocracy. So your autocracy includes things like monarchies. You can have a really good monarch. If you have a really good monarch, place runs really well. They've got all the power, they can do everything. Place runs really well. Problem is they then have a really crappy, usually son, who then is really bad, and then you have to deal with that. You then have the oligarchs. Oligarchs can be really good. It's a group of people, if say they're focused on money, they want everything to run to make the most money for themselves, but the way to make a lot of money for yourselves is other people to make money. Think of it from a business perspective. You've got more, if you open your business in an area with people with lots of disposable income, then you've got a bigger target audience, you can make more money. Therefore, if you're an oligarchic society with that, what you want is you want all of the people to have lots of money and be prosperous, because then you make more money because there are more people to sell things from. That's the good side, the sensible side, and that's how it's supposed to work. You then get the other side, which is things that we deal with now with sort of hyper-capitalism, where it's we will pay our workers. If we could pay them nothing, we would. But we still want the money. Yeah. So
now is the show. Hello, Dungeon Dan. Thank you for joining us.
Dan's back. Hello.
Dungeon Dan, our comet ninja, is back. Yeah, we're not talking about that today. We're talking about social classes. So
then you carries on. So then the third bit is you have your democracy, and then you have, this is the bit that people know about the most, democracy. Everyone agrees to something. Yes, a bunch of people may not like it, but the majority of people like that thing. Therefore, you're going to get the best for the most people out of that system. However, you get the tyranny of the masses concept. This is the equivalent of when you get a bunch of people together, the IQ drops, riots, crowds of people on demonstrations. You look at any of the riots in the US that have been labeled riots, and then the other people that supported them will call them demonstrations. Both sides are correct. 99% of the time, it's demonstration. People's thoughts are up. You get your support from people. Someone kicks it off by doing something absolutely stupid, sets everyone off. You get a riot. So you then get this problem with a mass of people together doing something. There's this Greek political thought that you need to mesh all three systems together. Our country has it in the House of Commons. That's your democracy. You have the House of Lords. That's your oligarchy. And then you have the monarch. That's your autocracy. So we mesh that together. The US has it in the other way around. President at the top, then Congress, and then the House of Representatives is the three groups going back down. Same basic equivalent thing that happens, that we have that. Roman society, because their hatred for monarchies and autocracy, never had that third bit at the top. Senators became that, and then when you hit the empire, that's when you had it. Emperor, top, then the Senate, then they didn't really have a House of Commons, but that's where they started to have problems. And it was then you get populist leaders, and that's when you get into this class system we're talking about. We had the plebs and the patricians, who were below the senatorial class. The senatorial class were kind of patricians, but a separate class in and of themselves.
Now, so now we're going to get into the next social class above the witch plebeians, the equites.
Yeah. People who had horses, literally people who had horses.
Look, social classes is the discussion. Would that be like the upper class Pornhub crowd versus the lower class Poom Preschool? Maybe, Dungeon Dan. I mean, orgies were a thing in ancient Rome, so you might not be entirely off with that joke there.
And actually, this. God damn it, Dungeon Dan, you've caught me again. There was a thing with prostitution as well, with the class of prostitute. And the higher class of prostitute, she would be termed an actress as well. When you get into the Byzantines, there was an emperor who married an actress, and it went to hell. Nika revolts, if you want to go into that story.
So Dungeon, you kind of triggered a bit of a tangent there, Dungeon Dan. Well done. Got him again. Yeah, you sure did. But anyway, equites were like you said, the horsemen were like the knights. You know, like the knights. You know, in feudal Europe, equites were like knights. They were not the highest, but they were well respected, and they had riches.
It's why the whole geisha thing is another part of society. That every part of society and job is stratified into certain parts. It's a bizarre thing, but you can equate it to so many parts, and obviously prostitution being one of the oldest professions. Also, they're professionals; they should be middle class. So you end up with this thing, as you say, with medieval knights. That's where medieval knights came from. They were the people, and this is the obligation we were talking about. That they had this obligation to. They were that level of people. This goes back to the Republic and the military in the Republic, which stems from the whole city-state idea that as a citizen of your city-state, you went out and fought. Citizenship came with service. It's Starship Troopers, basically. That whole ideology of unless you do something to serve the state and you're actually in a position for it, you don't get to go out and serve the state. And when you do, you've got to pay for your own stuff.
I want to answer this one. Dungeon Dan asks, what's the difference between knights and horsemen? Obviously, knights were hired by the king. They had to be crowned by the actual king himself. They're actually servicemen of the, and they actually got paid, and they were well respected within the community, and they got paid women. Basically, knights were like soldiers in modern day society. They're like soldiers.
A knight had. Here's a weird thing about being a knight. So this goes back to Saxon and Germanic societal stratification. So with Germanic society, you had the Thanes. Think of stuff with the Vikings and things like that. You get your housecarls as well, or the huscarls, depending on that's a term you would have come across Angel Play and Age of Empires, huscarls.
Basically, you could say that, Dungeon Dan. Knights were military, absolutely, and horsemen took care of the ride. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So
also, knights lived by a code. Yes, they did. Supposedly they lived by a code.
Supposedly, that comes from Romance literature, but
also. Nee Edwards has finally joined us. Hey, Nee, thank you for joining us. I know you're new, Nate. You have things to do, but welcome.
You're practicing for a zombie apocalypse out where Lee is at the moment, hence why he's
the eclipse.
So with knights is actually a really good question. This it comes up later as it changes through to the Byzantine formation of their armies. They had the Limitanii, who were essentially National Guard. We've talked about this before. and then you had the combatants, which were the field armies, where they moved around to do things. The field armies were mounted on horses, so having a horse was seen as better, partly because horses are expensive, so it's a symbol of status. Now, if you marry that with the Germanic idea of a thane, to be a thane, you had a certain amount of land, you had to equip a certain amount of troops. It was like 5 troops with like 3 spears and stuff. You also had to build a tower, a bell tower to the church, which is why bell towers traditionally aren't connected to churches, and why you've got that little bit in between the bell tower and the church when you look at older churches in the UK, because you had to have all of those things. But it's the obligation. You have this obligation as a knight. It actually ended up in the late 1400s into the 1500s, where people would pay to not be a knight, because you were expected to go to war, so they used to pay people off. Think about it as draft dodging. Essentially, this is that'd be for the US, the Vietnam War-esque draft dodging, where if you were rich. There was a lot of it also in Russia in the 1800s, where the way that they used to do they used to call them inspections. You used to go to an area and say, this area needs this many people, you're all coming with us to fight an imperial army against Napoleon. And you could pay someone else to take that position for your son because you were rich as well. One of the many problems that obviously led to less than 100 years later, well, almost exactly 100 years later, massive revolution. But you had this obligation to be, when you were a knight, to be a knight, your lands were protected by your monarch. You had an obligation to the state. In this case, the state would be the monarch. Right. And your obligation was that you would serve 60 days on campaign in any war, and that was it. This is why medieval campaigns ended up being short, because they used to avoid sieges where they could, because if a siege would last 2 months, which wasn't uncommon, cool, your knights are going home. And they just turn around and go, no, I've got to go home now. And they'd be like, oh, please stay. And be like, meh. It's where you end up with paid soldiers, indentures. I can go into the whole indenture thing. That's kind of my bit of military history that's qualification things. But when you go to the equites, a lot of it comes out of the idea of the equites. The equites, named that, obviously, you've got the connection with the horses. Horses are expensive. You've got to own the horse. Therefore, and you've got to stable the horse, you've got to keep the horse in good condition, you've got to buy the armor to be a horseman, you've also got to know how to use your bloody horse. So you've got to be of that level of society to be able to be on the horse. So they had the obligation to do that, but they would quickly fall out of that part of society if they could no longer maintain the appearance, like we talked about earlier, the appearance and the impression of the level that you're at. You had to do those things. It's like if you were working on Wall Street, you're not going to be able to buy a cheap suit and work on Wall Street. You've got to buy the expensive suit. You get a bonus, you're buying the fastest car that you can find that you can afford. You're going to get the biggest house that you can have. You're going to buy the most expensive things. You're showing off. It's all about the outward appearance of you in society, not the money you have.
Now, Aidan, I want to go on another tangent, because Dungeon Dan is here making jokes on our show, and I want to take a stab at him for a moment and say, if he was in Roman society, let's just say he would be a pretty no-class plebeian, because entertainers were not very respected in Roman society. So,
I definitely think.
So Dungeon Dan, you let's just say you wouldn't do too well in Roman society, my friend.
We've definitely discovered evidence of Dungeon Dan's ancestors in Rome. There's a lot of basically people drawing dicks on walls and writing lewd graffiti in brothels. I don't know where Dungeon Dan gets this from, but it just seems a little bit too connected to me.
I mean, you're not wrong, Dungeon Dan, but you know that's how people were back then. It was a weird time back then. I taught the Romans how to be Romans. Hey, I mean, whatever makes you sleep better at night, Dungeon. And Benny says,
wipe the smiles off our face when he turns out he's got a time machine, isn't it?
It sucks to find the winter. Yeah, you're right, Benny. And Benny also says, just a bit connected. Yeah, I think even Billy Bartholomew can see the connection between Dungeon Dan and the woman orgies and the all that good stuff. Oh, one more. Hold on. Steal everything, and I have lots of strange sex. Ooh, and I begin. Yeah, this is some triple X now. Sorry, guys.
That's no. We made that a thing from when we stole it from the Romans, and we had an empire over here.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how we did that.
Yeah, right.
We also introduced Ouija boards. Like, come on, like we went the next level. Anyway, sorry. Tangent over. We've got to the Equites. So Equites, but then we're in a patrician class now with Equites as well.
So okay. So now that we covered the Equites, it's finally time to get to the peak of Roman society. As we all know, we love to hate the patricians, the ones who were born with a silver spoon in their mouths, as we might say it in America. Born with a silver spoon in your mouth. By the way, Julius Caesar was a patrician, so just so you know, even though Julius Caesar he fought for the plebeians, he was actually a patrician. But anyway, the patricians were basically born into the Roman Senate, and they're basically the top of the top. And there was really no way to be. And one more thing: if you were a plebeian, you were a plebeian. There was no way to go from a plebeian to a patrician, unless you're married. Which, I mean, obviously, the chances of that happening were very, very low.
There were laws against it.
And there were laws against it, yeah.
Laws against mixing society that were pushed in as well.
Just ask Caligula. Oh, yeah, I gotta watch that movie again. Caligula.
Dungeon Dan Senior or Caligula.
He's a big fan of that movie.
So, one of the big things about this higher level of senators, you have essentially, like the US is a good example of this. You have senatorial families that go on. You think, like, if you pick any of the big family, you got the Bush family of a modern era is people that have always been there. You've had two of them have been presidents. The others, well, you've got Florida governor. You've got all of these different people from that family, and it's what they do. They are the people that are in charge. They rule things. So that, to me, Asia, I was just saying a good example of a senatorial family would be a connection to the US with the Bush family. So you've had two presidents, which is equate to consular terms. You've then got Jeb Bush, who was a governor, as governor of Florida, who had a lot of influence. So you've got, well, a governor. It was the same thing in the Romans. They had their whole governor thing as well. But you've got, that's a family who has an influence at that level and has people in that level. There are people who would be connected to that name as well. And there's, you had the Kennedys.
The Kennedys, yes.
The Kennedy family is, that's all over that. The Clintons is still relatively new in that grand scheme of things to that, but the Clintons are another family. You've got these families who've always been there, that are part of this higher level of society. In our country, we have it to a certain extent. Churchill was one of those people in our country. His dad, he sat in. It was famously he sat in the seat that his dad had sat in Parliament, even though it wasn't where he was supposed to sit. So you have this harkening back to, well, I'm meant to be here, a type of thing. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Spot on.
Good point.
And it's so the senatorial families. It goes then back to this idea of autocracy isn't necessarily bad. You can have a good autocrat. You can have good monarchs. It's much as people say bad things about Elizabeth II, and there was some weird stuff when she died that I completely disagreed with. And bearing in mind, I've said it millions of times here. I'm a flaming lefty. I am ridiculously far left. I don't know if I'd be allowed in the US with some of my ideology, but I was really angry about the way that the Queen was treated, because quite frankly, she was really nice. I mean, I met her a couple of times and she was always nice to me, which isn't always the best indicator, obviously, but she kept it up. She wasn't meant to be queen. She became queen at an incredibly young age. It was 21 when she became. She was monarch for the longest time, and in that she never broke a stride all the way through. She had to deal with the Second World War, all of the wars in between, all of the strife that we've had with our political stuff. There was massive strife in the 70s as well. The post Second World War strife that we had, obviously she became monarch in 52. And
right.
That was right in the middle of when rationing was still around, because our country was still destroyed. So it was when it was starting to come off of the books and the country was starting to be rebuilt. And she had this obligation. She fulfilled that obligation. She did exactly what a monarch is supposed to do. Yes, obviously she's going to mess up occasionally and everything like that, but she's distanced herself when she needs to distance herself. She did what she should have done at certain times. She said the correct things at certain times. She supported things. There's a famous thing of just after Brexit, famous for a hat. This is one of the signals that you could give in a society like that is stratified in a very specific way. You're not allowed to say certain things about other parts of society or say things specifically to influence. She wore a hat after Brexit in Parliament, when she was giving a speech, that was blue with a circle of yellow flowers that very much resembled the EU flag. Won't go into the whole Brexit thing. That would be an interesting discussion to have on another one of these, connected to history, obviously, because there's some nice parallels in history with it. But that's the only way that she could put forward. There's a whole thing about her brooches that she wore. You wear certain brooches to certain things, and she knew she did that. That's what a monarch does. That's a good monarch. Yet a lot of senators were like that. It's where you had these senators that were for the plebs and they put stuff forward. Yes, they got better. Yes, they got something from it. But it's that thing that I said earlier, especially about oligarchs, because they're essentially oligarchs at this point. Of if you have everyone having a lot of money, there's a lot more people that can buy from your business, and you make a lot of money. They're that kind of people. And there were a lot of but then you had senators who didn't do that. And then you had, the Gracchi brothers, and that's a republic. That was grain riots and all sorts. People being thrown off, tar peel, rock left, right, and centre. Dear God, they should have put a trampoline at the bottom of that one. But yeah, they had a lot of these rebellions that came through. But the senatorial class was very protective of their positions, and they were the people in charge. And it's very much more like a feudal society. It's like your lords, people who are lord, people who are duke, and all of the other titles that go with that. Those people going, well, no one else gets to do this. You don't have one of these titles. You go away. It's like we get to decide things. We're the people in charge. But also, shit went wrong. They had to stab themselves to death. So it's kind of a big thing. It was a big risk reward.
Hey, Patty Minnow, thank you for joining us. You're catching the very end. You haven't caught my forever, I know, but thank you for joining. You're catching us live now. Thank you for joining. Before we end the show, Aidan, there is one more question I want to ask. Based on women's society and everything we talked about, and I'm going to start by asking, and I want to ask, would you want to live in women's society? Based on what we've talked about and based on how life has gone for you, do you think a women's society would have worked for you or no?
If I would
say, I'll start and I would say.
Yeah, you go for it. You have a bit of time to think.
I would say maybe, because because it's two very different societies. I mean, what I do now is I can write and I can do what I want because the technology is out there and society is a whole lot different. Now, to be a scribe in ancient Rome, it was a whole different thing to be a scribe in ancient Rome.
But you had to respect. You'd have been outside of society at certain.
It was a very respectful job. So I mean, if I could have been a scribe, yeah, sign me up for Roman society anytime. Sign me up for sure. So now I pass the question on to you, Aidan, as an historian.
So, right, we obviously have to put aside all modern enhancements like medical treatment and things like that as a thing that I have to lose. I see. If I had knowledge like I have now, I'm not saying go back in time and know everything that's going to happen, but in the I've had an education that would then put me in the patrician class at the very least. Put me in sort of solidly in the middle of society. Has some respect. Could have ended up sort of patricians. Weirdly, could get into the senatorial class if they did things right. They could jump that through certain societal things. They didn't have to wait for the next generation. It took a lot of effort, but you could do it. We haven't even looked at the Honorius Curia Honorium. I can't remember the name of it now. There's specific things that you had to do to get to certain levels. It's like in the military, you have to be at X rank for X amount of time and then have done X things to be able to promote it to the next level. They had that for their politics. But I reckon if I was so, I put it this way. Let's look at it from what my parents did. So my mum, when my mum and dad met, my dad was a technician, worked on aircraft and things like that. He'd joined the military at that point, or just about to. Either way, he's going to join the military. My mum worked in the post office. She worked for the government as what would in the Roman times, she'd be the person putting the scrolls in the right place, type of thing. She would be on the servant level, but in a respected servant position. Think a legal secretary level of things. Of not your common secretary, a legal secretary who knows things and is able to do things, has a respected job. My mum then is a qualified teacher. She does teaching as well, another respected job, but tends to be sort of like that's your upper plebeian level stuff. My dad, obviously upper plebeian level stuff, right? He joined the military, didn't join as an officer, but he reached a rank that would be equivalent to a Roman centurion. So he'd have been a centurion's rank. So I'd have been the child of a centurion, which means I'd have been able to be in the patrician class through the education and connections that you would have had as a centurion. I think personally, I'd have done okay, actually, in that. Yeah, you said that, yeah, I work in a shop and live in social housing, but that's modern society. But in that society, because it's more focused on your family's position in society, I think I may have done that bit better. I may have managed to get myself into patrician class. I mean, I've only bred a horse like twice, but yeah, I can make a go of it. I can make my own armor. There we are. That's a good start. I'll get my own armor and I can get a horse. Yeah, right. Be a patrician. If I'll be a patrician, yeah, I'll go for it. Yeah, I'll do that. Something nice and interesting.
All right, so that's gonna be it for this episode. We already reached over the hour, but before we go, Tony White gave us a good suggestion for another show. You should do a show on the power that the Praetorian Guards had, like when they sold the position of emperor. Yeah. I think that should be the topic next week, Aidan.
Yeah, I'm up for that.
Yeah, for next week. So yeah, guys, that's gonna do it for us. Thank you guys for joining us. Before you go, guys watching from the Book Assignment Podcast, please consider joining my group, the Legion of Evangelist Facebook group, and also check out our family of podcasts on the bookassignment.com. So, guys, have a great weekend. Have a wonderful week. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us on our debut episode of The Art of Warfare. And we're going to be on every Saturday, or at least when we can. So, but we'll be on next week with the Praetorian Guard. So, thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you next week. This has been Praetorian Actionist Maximus. That has been the Gate. Aidan Colyer, and we will see you next week. Take it easy, guys. Bye-bye.
All right.